On August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb, codenamed Little Boy, detonated over the skies of Hiroshima. At ground zero of the nuclear blast, the temperature instantly soared to over 4,000 degrees. The residents who happened to be standing here were vaporized in the blink of an eye. Carbonized black shadows on the ground were the only traces of their existence. Then a devastating shock wave, with an initial pressure of nearly 7 tons per square meter, swept through the entire city. The city center was leveled in an instant. Nearly 600 buildings at the epicenter were reduced to rubble. The lives of approximately 80,000 people were extinguished in the first few seconds of the blast. The sky fell and the earth cracked open over Hiroshima. 9 days later, World War II finally came to an end. But for many survivors, the disaster had only just begun. A massive amount of nuclear radiation spewed forth from the epicenter. It penetrated skin-destroyed cells and annihilated the fundamental structures of living tissue. Tens of thousands more would die within days, weeks or months, and infertility, cancer, leukemia, cataracts, and many other diseases would become like a waking nightmare in the long years to come, casting a shadow over this land. After the Manhattan Project ended, Oppenheimer said, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." This was not false modesty. On one hand, the world-destroying power of the atomic bomb did indeed maintain a long-lasting peace among the major powers after World War II, and the application of nuclear radiation also ushered in a new era in medicine industry, energy, and many other fields. On the other hand, once the Pandora's box of nuclear power was opened, it was destined to spread among nations like a plague. And in the end, it is humans who control this terrifying power. And since they are human, there's no guarantee that everyone who wields this power will be rational. So in this day and age, nuclear accidents are hardly a rare occurrence. What is rare is how differently each country responds when one happens. This begs the question, what exactly is radiation? And what about nuclear radiation? Which types can actually harm our bodies? And what kind of damage are we talking about specifically? And once radiation is unleashed, what price will humanity be forced to pay? Because the more we researched, the script just kept getting longer and longer. So we had no choice but to split this investigation on radiation into a 2-part series. We also hope all of you will smash that like button and help us achieve our epic goal of releasing 2 videos per month this new year. You've got to have a dream, right? What if it actually comes true? And on that note, we'd like to wish everyone a happy new year. On November the 8th, 1895, a German named Röntgen was puzzled when he found that photographic plates stored securely in his lab were somehow being mysteriously exposed. This led him to the discovery of a new kind of ray. Not only did it have incredible penetrating power, but it could also cause a fluorescent screen to glow. Since this ray was a complete unknown at the time, Röntgen named it after the mathematical unknown X. On December the 22nd, Röntgen took the first X-ray image in human history. His subject was his wife. In June of 1896, a man named Li Hongzhang, during a visit to Germany, became the first person from China to undergo an X-ray scan. The X-ray clearly showed the bullet lodged in his left cheek, a wound he received from a Japanese assassin after the signing of the Treaty of Shimonoseki. Just 1 month after the discovery of X-rays, a medical student in Chicago named Emil Gruber had a theory. He reasoned that if X-rays could penetrate skin, then with a large enough dose and a sufficiently focused beam, could they perhaps be used to burn away tumors that were surgically inoperable? And so Gruber performed the first successful radiation therapy in human history. Over the next 15 years, he would go on to treat hundreds of cancer cases using X-rays. Using a homemade X-ray machine, after several cancer patients had passed away, he finally managed to alleviate the cancer pain for some patients. This miraculous therapy was the prototype for what we now know as radiotherapy. Besides Gruber, the French scientist Becquerel was also inspired by Röntgen. He hypothesized that since X-rays could make a fluorescent screen glow, then perhaps fluorescent materials could also produce X-rays. So he began all sorts of experiments and eventually discovered that fluorescent materials and X-rays had absolutely nothing to do with each other. However, just as fate guided Fleming to discover penicillin, Lady Luck once again smiled upon him. During his experiments, Becquerel discovered that photographic plates wrapped in black paper, when placed together with a certain uranium-containing fluorescent substance, had been exposed. This meant that this piece of uranium salt was possibly emitting some kind of unknown radiation. Through further experiments, Becquerel finally confirmed the existence of natural radioactivity. The Curies, who were also deeply inspired, successively discovered 2 new radioactive elements in 1898. Marie Curie named polonium after her homeland, Poland, and named radium from the Latin word for ray. The 3 of them shared the 1903 Nobel Prize in Physics. However, at that time, they didn't know that the radiation they had discovered was something entirely different from what Röntgen had found. When people hear the word radiation, it's hard for them not to associate it with harm to the body. But in reality, not all radiation is harmful. In a broad sense, radiation refers to energy that spreads outward in the form of waves or particles. When you speak, you transmit sound radiation. When you sunbathe, you receive solar radiation. Even your own body produces thermal radiation. This is how thermal imaging night vision can catch you in the dark, and the X-rays discovered by Röntgen. That's electromagnetic radiation, which transmits energy outward in the form of electromagnetic waves. For those of you who know a bit of physics, you'll know that the higher the frequency of an electromagnetic wave's oscillation, the more energy it carries, from low frequency to high. The lineup mainly includes radio waves, microwaves, infrared, visible light, ultraviolet, X-rays and gamma rays. Now what Becquerel and the Curies discovered was nuclear radiation. It comes from inside the atom, from the atomic nucleus. Because certain atomic nuclei are extremely unstable, they will randomly emit particles and energy outwards. That's why it's called nuclear radiation. The well-known uranium-235 in atomic bombs, the potassium-40 in bananas, and the polonium-210 in cigarettes are all radioactive elements. In our daily lives, every moment of every day, we are exposed to all kinds of radiation. Generally speaking, this isn't a huge problem. But when the radiation has enough energy to knock electrons loose from the atoms or molecules of a substance, that's a different story. Because it has the power to destroy the very foundation of life structure, DNA. In severe cases, it can trigger cancer and death. This type of radiation is called ionizing radiation. All nuclear radiation is ionizing radiation. But among electromagnetic radiation, only the highest energy types, X-rays, gamma rays, and the high-energy end of the ultraviolet spectrum, are considered ionizing radiation. So looking at your phone or computer screen, or even using your finger to comment on or like this video, aside from giving us a great deal of encouragement, will cause you virtually no radiation damage. So does that mean any exposure to ionizing radiation will immediately affect your body? Of course not. The human body can repair small amounts of damaged DNA on its own. Otherwise, wouldn't the ultraviolet rays from the sun have driven us to extinction? The human body can repair small amounts of damaged DNA on its own. Otherwise, the ultraviolet rays from the sun would have us. We work at sunrise and rest at sunset. However, even the most precise DNA repair enzymes have their limits. If the radiation dose is too high, they can get overwhelmed and make mistakes, leading to incorrect DNA repairs and causing cells to become cancerous. Cancer cells appear, or there's simply massive cell death because the enzymes can't keep up with the repairs. If regular cells die, stem cells can still take their place. But if your stem cells are wiped out, it's game over. So the question is, just how much ionizing radiation can the human body actually withstand? China's basic standards for protection against ionizing radiation and for the safety of radiation sources specifies the occupational exposure levels for workers. Within a 5-year period, the average annual effective dose is not allowed to exceed 20 millisieverts, and the effective dose in any single year is not allowed to exceed 50 millisieverts. What does that even mean? The radiation dose from a single banana is about 0.0000778 millisieverts. A 1-hour flight will expose you to an additional 0.005 millisieverts of radiation. A chest X-ray has a radiation dose of about 0.1 millisieverts, and a chest CT scan is about 6 to 8 millisieverts. You could say that, unless you have extraordinarily bad luck in this life, the largest source of artificial radiation you're likely to encounter is probably a CT scan. This is why, for some CT scans, the doctor will use a lead apron to cover the parts of your body not being examined. On a side note, MRIs use radio waves, so they're very safe. You don't have to worry about being exposed to ionizing radiation. You just have to worry if you have enough money in your pocket. So what if you receive a very large amount of ionizing radiation in a short time, or live in a high radiation environment for a long time? What would the consequences be? Röntgen, the man who discovered X-rays due to years after being exposed to excessive X-rays, they tragically died from cancer. Two-time Nobel laureate Madame Curie, due to her prolonged contact with radioactive materials, had the hematopoietic stem cells in her bone marrow depleted and ultimately died of aplastic anemia. Emil Gruber, who pioneered the era of radiotherapy, found his body covered in tumors more than 20 years later, through surgery. They amputated his hand, forearm, and upper lip, leaving him monstrously disfigured before he finally succumbed to cancer. These early researchers often died from radiation-induced leukemia and various cancers, and it was their sacrifice that led to the safe radiation dosage standards we have today. In order not to impede the progress of scientific research, whether it was Röntgen, Becquerel, or the Curies, none of them applied for any patents for their discoveries. And this is where capitalists smelled a business opportunity. They launched Miss Spine beauty pageants, turning X-ray portraits into a fashion statement. Shoe vendors used X-ray shoe fitters as a marketing gimmick, letting customers get an X-ray every time they tried on a new pair. Some even promoted the use of X-rays for female hair removal. Later on, the skin of these women developed various degrees of discoloration infections, ulcerations, and skin cancer. The commercialization of radioactive elements was even more audacious. Because natural uranium ore was already rather nice-looking, it was used as a coloring agent to create brightly colored glass or tiles that gave off a faint glow. The bathrooms and kitchens of many homes were lined with these things. Radium, which appeared a little later, due to its ability to induce fluorescence, was quickly used to manufacture glow-in-the-dark paint. Many young girls were hired to work in watch factories, responsible for painting watch dials with radium-based paint. For the sake of painting with precision, radium, which appeared later, due to its fluorescent properties, was soon used to make glow-in-the-dark paint. Many girls were hired to work in watch factories, responsible for painting the dials with radium-based paint. For the sake of painting with precision, they were told to use their lips to shape the brush bristles before painting, to keep the tip sharp. In doing so, they ingested large amounts of radioactive radium. Because of how radium is metabolized in the body, it's a bit like calcium. It easily gets lodged in the bones, affecting the blood-forming cells, irradiating them from the inside. And so these girls were gradually shot through by the radium, their bodies ravaged. Besides being made into paint, there were also radium-laced cosmetics that could radiate youth and beauty. There was also radium bread, radium toys, radium underwear, and radium condoms. There was even a powerful medicine that promised a jolt of thunderous energy for weak, depressed men. The good news is because it was rare, radium was very expensive, so the vast majority of radium products on the market were fakes. The bad news is there were genuine merchants and incredibly wealthy people. In October of 1927, a famous American entrepreneur, Eben Byers, injured his arm. A man named Bailey, who claimed to be a doctor, recommended him a kind of cure-all that claimed to boost immunity, slow down aging, treat high blood pressure, and over 150 other diseases. It was called Radithor, also known as liquid sunshine. Not long after taking it, Byers felt his pain improve, At the same time, he was also deeply convinced that liquid sunshine had improved his performance in a certain department. From then on, he couldn't get enough of it. The key was he was so rich he could ignore the price of Radithor, drinking 3 bottles a day. Over the next few years, Byers consumed a total of over 1,400 bottles of Radithor. His teeth began to fall out. His skin broke out in sores. His immune system gradually collapsed, and by the time he began to suspect there was a problem with Radithor, his insides had been riddled with radioactive material. At the time of his death, he weighed only 41 kilograms. His upper jaw had practically dissolved, and his lower jawbone was surgically removed. The radiation had eaten through nearly every bone in his body. Even his coffin had to be lined with thick lead plates for his burial, to prevent radiation from leaking out into the surroundings. The Wall Street Journal reported on the incident, with the headline, "The radium water worked fine until his jaw came off." This became the turning point for the radium medicine market. Although the development of nuclear health products came to a halt, research into nuclear radiation never stopped for a moment. In 1938, German scientists Hahn and Strassmann, while bombarding uranium with neutrons, discovered the phenomenon of nuclear fission for the first time. Anyone who's tried their hand at building an atomic bomb knows what this means. The basic principle of an atomic bomb is to bombard uranium-235 or plutonium-239 with a neutron, causing it to split and release multiple new neutrons. These neutrons then go on to bombard other uranium-235 or plutonium-239 atoms, triggering new nuclear fission reactions. This is the legendary chain reaction. The entire process releases an immense amount of energy in a very short time. Just 1 week after confirming that the uranium nucleus could undergo fission, a rough sketch of an atomic bomb appeared on the blackboard in Oppenheimer's office. The Manhattan Project moved forward steadily. On August 6, 1945, a uranium bomb, codenamed Little Boy, was dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a plutonium bomb codenamed Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki. On August 15, 1945, Japan announced its unconditional surrender, becoming to this day the only nation to have ever suffered a nuclear attack. After that, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, France and other countries successfully conducted their own nuclear tests one after another. An atomic bomb named Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, an atomic bomb named Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki. On August 15, 1945, Japan announced its unconditional surrender, becoming the only country to have ever been attacked with nuclear weapons. After this, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, France, and other nations, one after another, successfully conducted nuclear tests. The world gradually entered an era of peace. America's Time magazine once featured Oppenheimer as its cover story, and at the bottom they added a small line of text. "What we don't understand, we explain to each other." Roughly translated, it means, let's talk things out nicely. As for whether others will listen, that depends on whether you truly possess weapons of mass destruction. Iraq didn't have them, but the United States said it did. So not having them meant they had them. And so without obtaining authorization from the United Nations, the United States launched its invasion of Iraq. Ukraine once had them, but it gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for a commitment from countries like the US, the UK and Russia to guarantee Ukraine's security and territorial integrity. Today it's mired in the bog of war. The venerable scientist Chan Suesen once said, "Whether you have a sword in your hand and choosing not to use the sword you have are two completely different things." In October of 1964, China's first atomic bomb was successfully detonated at the Lop Nur nuclear test site. 2 years later, under the direction of Yu Min, the hydrogen bomb, even more powerful than the atomic bomb, was successfully detonated. 60 years later, in September of 2024, the People's Liberation Army, Rocket Force, successfully launched an intercontinental ballistic missile toward the relevant international waters of the Pacific Ocean, carrying a training simulation warhead, which landed precisely in the designated sea area. After this missile with a range of over 10,000 kilometers, was fired. A spokesperson for the U.S. Pentagon stated, "We did receive some advance notification regarding the intercontinental ballistic missile test. We consider this a positive development. Is this reasonable? It's very reasonable." This is the most reasonable interpretation of that Time magazine quote, "Let's talk things out nicely." 2 months after China completed its missile test, Russia launched strikes into Ukrainian territory. A single one can carry 6 nuclear warheads, a new type of intermediate-range missile. But as the entire world debates whether nuclear war will break out once more, almost no one remembers that the two sides now at war once fought to save the very same country in the largest-scale resistance against nuclear radiation in human history. All right, that's all for this episode. If you found it interesting or a little bit helpful, you can follow us. That way you can learn more medical knowledge.